And ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to this 11th day of May 2022. Well, it's 20 degrees and raining right here in Brisbane. And of course, it says partly sunny, but I can't see the sun around, not at this point in time. Well, right now it is raining and it is very, very cloudy. Well, let's take a look at what's happening out there. Well, first of all, what do we have in store for today? First of all, we have this news update. Then we'll have the daily India report. And then we'll be joining for the live session of Queensland Parliament. And 10 a.m. we'll have the real estate update with Usha Chandra. So right now, let's take a look at how things have turned. And Albanese now backs the minimum wage increase. Here's that report.
They have some of the most important jobs, but these aged care workers are among the lowest paid. Just $22 an hour, little more than $1 over the minimum wage.
I believe the minimum wage should at least keep up with the cost of living.
Anthony Albanese's put wages at the centre of his election campaign. Today, he put a number on it.
You don't want people to go backwards. Does that mean you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
No Australian government or opposition has ever put a figure on the rate of the annual wage increase. And yet Mr Albanese today has done just that.
Mr Albanese, you said wages absolutely...
Although Labor later insisted it would not put a specific number in any formal submission to the industrial umpire on the minimum wage.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
What's controversial about wages keeping up with the cost of living?
Has Anthony Albanese considered whether this decision will have inflationary impacts?
Inflation, currently just over 5%, is expected to peak at 6% by year's end. Unions demanding a 5.5% rise for more than 2 million Australians on award wages.
Any increase less than 5.1% is a real wage cut.
Higher costs have to be passed through into prices.
Whether he intended it or not, Anthony Albanese has effectively declared 5.1% a fair wage rise for the lowest paid workers. It will have popular appeal, but given economists and the business community warn it would also drive up inflation and interest rates even faster, expect Scott Morrison to refocus on the Labor leader's economic credentials. Then again, the PM's own personal investments are proving to have a poor return. His captain's pick candidate, Catherine Deves, effectively withdrawing her apology for calling gender reassignment surgery mutilation.
That was inappropriate?
Look, that is actually the correct medico-legal term.
This is a significant surgical procedure that completely changes someone's life, and it should never be entered into lightly.
You have implied that young people 18 and over enter into a fundamentally life-changing surgery lightly.
You're implying that. I'm not implying that.
A culture war that harms the vulnerable few, and for what? A candidate with little chance of winning. Andrew Probyn, ABC News.
And having a look at the minimum wage and the terminology used around surgeries, what else should we be talking about in this election campaign?
Petrol prices around Australia have come down since the federal government halved the fuel excise in the budget.
So you're offering a great price. You guys better fill up. This is a good price.
The 6-month cut to the tax on each litre sold is just a temporary attempt to ease the cost of living ahead of the election.
It's temporary, it's targeted, it's affordable.
Well, this is a temporary change.
But some motoring groups fear political pressure could make the measure more permanent and think that would bode badly for the future of the nation's roads.
We find it very hard to believe that in September the Treasurer of the day is going to happily increase petrol prices by 25 cents a litre. It's already cost the budget $3 billion. They do this for another 6 months, 12 months. We're talking many billions of dollars not there for Transport Network.
The flat tax does not directly fund the Transport Network, but it is an important budget item that politicians regularly link to infrastructure like new bridges. Few people think about it, but if you drive an average petrol SUV, you're paying roughly $5 in excise for every 100 kilometres you drive. And if you have an electric car, then you, of course, don't pay it at all. For years now, there has been debate about replacing fuel excise with a new uniform national system of road user charges, and many believe the Commonwealth should now be playing more of a role.
It's completely unsustainable as a tax. I would like to think that when September rolls around and the Treasurer is tasked with increasing petrol prices by 25 cents overnight, I would think that's not a bad time to start a conversation about what our long-term tax system should look like, because the penetration of EVs, that's a great thing for the environment, it's a terrible thing for the federal budget.
It is curious to think that at an election in 2022, when tackling climate change is a top concern of many voters, one tax change both major parties agree on is a short-term cut to excise on fossil fuels. But neither of the men vying to become Prime Minister is discussing the longer-term problem of how to raise revenue from drivers in the future as we slowly transition to electric cars, or, for that matter, what to do about the overall state of Australia's finances, which have an ongoing shortfall.
Certainly over the next 10 years or so, we're not at the moment projected to head back into surplus anytime soon, and that level of debt is certainly on the increase and looking to be quite substantial, well over $1 trillion into the future.
A new Professor Ben Phillips says that means at some point the federal government needs to reform and raise taxes, or cut spending, or grow the economy, and perhaps a combination of all three.
Growing the economy is always a noble goal, but difficult to necessarily achieve, particularly in the short to medium term.
The support for the floating of the dollar was clear.
Economists have long urged Australian politicians to look at longer-term and big-picture reforms akin to those pushed through in the 80s and 90s to boost productivity and our prosperity in the coming decades.
This very important discussion paper.
There is no shortage of ideas to fix the budget and grow the economy. For example, most of the proposals in the 2010 Henry Tax Review have gathered dust on a shelf.
Let's spend the taxpayers' money as though it is our money.
So have a number of the recommendations in Tony Shepherd's 2014 Commission of Audit.
The problem is that the community's got used to free or cheap money. We have to get them off that, and we have to also get the community to understand that economic reform really is the only way that we can protect ourselves for the future fiscally and economically and enjoy a higher standard of living.
Aside from introducing new road user charges, other ideas for reform often put forward include putting the GST on more items, pricing carbon emissions more effectively, and helping the states replace inefficient stamp duties with land taxes. But as recent history shows, those sorts of ideas can be very politically poisonous. Even many leading policy thinkers are reluctant to float them in a campaign because leaders are so often then asked to rule them out for the next 3 years.
For Australia to continue to grow and prosper, there always needs to be a discussion around economic reform and also social reform. I think sometimes we forget that a good society is also a good economy. Unfortunately, it's been a pretty toxic one that we've had in recent years and even recent decades.
One economic issue that has been discussed at length in this campaign is how to boost the pay packets of workers. Unions are currently urging the industrial umpire to increase the minimum wage by 5.5% to $21.45 an hour, arguing if workers could see themselves getting ahead, then they might be open to broader reform.
Workers are becoming pretty frustrated with hearing wages will go up if productivity goes up, because productivity has gone up every single year and workers haven't seen the benefits of that.
Business groups want the pay increase to be limited to no more than 3%.
We have to have responsible wages outcomes that don't fuel inflation and end up adding to higher interest rates in the future.
The Prime Minister has indicated that's a concern for him too. Scott Morrison has repeatedly said he has no special wand to boost wages and argued that increases should be left to the industrial umpire.
We have always welcomed and accepted the recommendations that have come from that body. That is the appropriate way. Well, of course I do. That's why we've halved the petrol tax.
This is one area of major difference between the two leaders, and today Anthony Albanese declared the lowest earners in the country should get pay rises that at least keep up with the cost of living. It's a move that is likely to have some popular appeal, but it'll worry some business groups because inflation is currently at 5.1% and forecast to go even higher before the end of the year.
You said you don't want people to go backwards. Does that mean you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
And secondly,
we think no one should go backwards. People should be at least keeping up with the cost of living.
So on the election trail, and of course when you are asked questions right on the spur of the moment, you need to be pretty sharp as to what you are actually saying, because it's going to come back and bite you. Well, talking about wages, of course, it is always the economic forces, supply and demand. Right now, people are finding it very hard to find staff. So as they mentioned, that now is a very good time to be in employment. If you're a job seeker, good opportunities do exist for you now.
In the northern Tasmanian electorate of Bass, natural wonders make tourism a big employer here.
Because it's such a culturally significant area for our people.
But for this Indigenous cultural tours operator, bookings have been slow since the state reopened its border. As the cost of living rises, Greg Murray is worried things will get worse.
We have what they want to see, but they've got to be able to get here, and it's got to represent good value for money.
Businesses want free car travel on the ferry to Tasmania extended. They're also lobbying for guaranteed funding to reduce freight costs.
The Bass Strait is one of the most expensive bodies of water in the world because it's such a short run. So again, it's cheaper for someone to get a container from Melbourne to Singapore than to get from Launceston to Melbourne.
Launceston is where the majority of Bass voters live. It's the most marginal Liberal seat in the country.
Bass has been described as the nation's ejector seat, and that's because at 8 of the last 10 federal elections, it's changed party status. Now, with that sort of history, it's used to being the centre of attention.
For publican Grace Robbins, finding staff and the environment are among her top concerns.
Tourism in Tasmania is vital to businesses like this. We also sell a lot of local Tasmanian produce that are all going to be affected by climate change.
The seat of Bass is held by Liberal Bridget Archer on a margin of 0.4%. In the last parliament, she raised her profile by crossing the floor on issues including the Federal Integrity Commission. But even a small swing against the coalition could see the former MP Labor's Ross Hart re-elected.
And these are 100% manufactured here in this factory of
While local manufacturing is booming, companies want the major parties to do more to help them find and train staff.
Every business we represent now employs more people than they did 2-3 years ago, which is great for the region, and hence now we have the issue of the shortage of labour and skills.
Lee Darcy represents big companies like Rio Tinto and GFG Alliance, which both operate smelters in Bass, as well as smaller players like Temtrol.
The universities don't have the international students here to be trained that we normally then attract and keep them here, so whatever can be done to really get students back.
So we know that right across the board people are facing that problem of labour shortage. And of course, many people may be a bit reluctant taking on new ones right at this point in time, with the wage increase being on the agenda as well. So we will mean a lot and see how things are going. But right now, let's take a look at what else is happening in the manufacturing sector of Australia. Do we have the capabilities and the skills needed to build, say, let's talk about nuclear submarines.
Rebecca Lanack is in her first year of a fabrication apprenticeship. Along with her TAFE classmates, she's hoping the future is bright in the defence shipbuilding industry.
I was always a hands-on learner and loved building things, so I found this opportunity and I was like, I really want to go for this.
These apprentices all work at BAE Systems, the British company that won the contract to design and build 9 frigates at the Osborne shipyards.
To see a ship that's floating in the water and to say, I built part of that, or look at a part and think, hey, I made part of that. It's just exciting.
Promises of exciting jobs in defence have long been at the forefront of election campaigns in South Australia. It hit a flashpoint in the lead up to the 2016 poll when shipbuilding jobs at Osborne entered a so-called valley of death as work on air warfare destroyers wound up. The Abbott government's promise of a fleet of locally built submarines seemed sunk. The political damage almost cost some South Australian Liberals their own jobs.
Thought I'd bake them a cake, a submarine cake, to remind them of their broken promise not to build the submarines here in Australia.
Until a new Prime Minister signed a deal with the French to build 12 diesel submarines in Adelaide.
I am determined that every dollar we spend on defence procurement, as far as possible, should be spent in Australia.
It seemed a future pipeline of jobs was secure until last year when the French deal was torpedoed in favour of exploring a nuclear option with the UK and US, throwing fresh uncertainty over what work would happen here.
We're working through all of those issues at present. And that is certainly our intention, to maximise all of that. Of course it is.
Ideally, you manufacture them here because that's a defence.
Well, so there you are. They manufacture, whether you manufacture them here at what cost, or do we, go the French way, which has been torn up, and now we are looking at UK and US to supply us with these submarines. Well, as we have noticed, in the last few weeks, that the market's taken a bit of a slide. So, with that slide, it comes with some buying opportunities.
Investors in general are most concerned about inflation, which is global, but mainly the problem sits in the US and Europe, where most of the investment markets or the majority of the money sits, and they're just wondering how long inflation stays elevated. As we've seen over the last few months, inflation has really kicked up for a number of reasons: strong demand, but also because of supply problems around the world with supply lines, wars and so on. So that's what they're trying to work out, because once you can get a grip on when inflation comes down, you can get a grip on interest rates, which determine valuations in markets.
With respect to share markets, I mean, how far do you think this sell-off can go? And looking more broadly, do you think all asset classes are going to be hit?
Well, it's been very interesting because the actual sell-off probably started in August last year, and as we know, the high-flying tech sector, and particularly in the US, and we see that in the NASDAQ index, has been down for a while now, and it's down about 26% from its top. So it's had a fairly big correction, and that was all about valuations, company valuations, very high valuations that needed to be reeled in, because higher interest rates mean you discount those asset values back more aggressively. But more recently, it's bled into another story, which is, does the US and the rest of the world effectively have to go into recession to kill off inflation, which is the enemy of asset prices around the world? And that's where we've headed now. So other places which have done quite well, including the Australian share market, which is only down about 7 or 8%, dominated by banks, dominated by mining companies, they're starting to suffer a bit now, because if a recession does come, that's not good for them.
Well, theories abound around that, recession or not. One is that we're heading for a crash. Another is that everything will just stagnate. Some are even calling for an era of prosperity. What are you forecasting?
Well, I think a crash is I shouldn't say this with too much surety because it might come, but I don't think we've got a crash in our hands. I think we've had a pretty orderly decline in asset prices as interest rates have gone up. So it's not a surprise. On individual days like yesterday and today, it does speed up a bit, and it does cause a bit of anxiety. But generally, asset prices, the equity market prices, have declined fairly orderly. Now, as I said, what happens in the future is always a guess. But it's all around what happens with inflation. Now, if we get some early signs, the next couple of inflation data points out of the US show that inflation may have peaked, then you'll get the bond market, the interest rate market starting to level off, and that could actually be quite good for equity markets again, where they think, well, we know where interest rates are heading. Now, that is a maybe, and that'll be over the next couple of months. We get an inflation figure out of the US this week. That's the first sign, and maybe one, a month later. And if those two are fairly benign, equity prices might find a bottom fairly quickly. Conversely, as I said, I've outlined how much markets have fallen. The NASDAQ's taken the brunt of it, down 26%. The S&P 500 in the US down 16 or 17%. But the Aussie market, which is dominated by commodity-based stocks, only down 7 or 8%. So if inflation persists and they have to jack those rates up higher and higher and it does go into recession, you're looking at a market that can continue to grind its way down, I would think, into the back end of this year.
Investors have been here before, haven't they, Matthew? Because when you look at the similarities from the 1987 crash, what lessons really, if any, are applicable from there for now?
Yeah, look, 87 was interesting. It was a little bit before my time, but going back and putting on my history hat, there was a lot of leverage in the market. When I say leverage, people were borrowing a lot of money to get into a rising stock market, and it happens. This time round, slightly different. There's not, well, not in the domestic economy, there's not a lot of leverage, but where the excesses were in that tech sector fundamentally. Not exclusively, but growth and tech. And that is coming out at a fairly rapid rate, as we've seen. Even in Australia, we're not dominated by tech stocks, but the smaller component of the tech industry has seen stocks like a realestate.com or a WiseTech and these bigger tech-enabled stocks down 40, 50%. So they haven't escaped it. It just hasn't dominated our index. So I don't think we're going to get a crash, but this orderly decline, this bear market that's evolving, we might only be halfway through it in the declines, as I said, if they can't get on top of inflation. So I don't think it's panic stations. I think you're getting set up for a good buying opportunity in the back half of this year, but there's a little bit of pain to go through, and I think other asset classes, whether it be property, residential, where a lot of Australians are in, and so on, they're probably going to go through the same situation. It's just that you don't see the prices day to day like you do in the share market, which, as I said, can cause a bit of anxiety. I don't think we're at that anxious stage.
Matthew Kidman, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that report and that update. Ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our daily India report.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you reports, interviews, features and much more on India and the Indian diaspora. The Indian rupee plummets 60 paise to close at an all-time low of $77.50.
In the last two trading sessions, India's currency, the rupee, has lost 115 paise against the greenback. The Indian rupee extended its losses and slumped 60 paise to close at a record low of 77.50 against the United States dollar on May 9th, pressured by the strength of the American currency overseas and unabated foreign fund outflows. Forex traders said risk appetite has weakened amid mounting concerns about inflation that may trigger more aggressive rates hikes by global central banks. With the rupee hitting an all-time low, imports, foreign education and travel could all get expensive. Experts say the winners in this scenario are the exporters and the domestic tourism sector. Losers are importers, corporates with unhedged dollar loans and households facing increased inflation from a weaker rupee.
Severe cyclonic storm Asani is expected to weaken.
Heavy rain lashed Kolkata city in eastern India and adjoining districts on May 9th morning in the wake of the formation of Cyclone Asani over the southeast regions of Bay of Bengal. According to experts, the storm is likely to move northwest by May 10th and reach west central and joining northwest Bay of Bengal off the North Andhra Pradesh and Odisha coasts. Thereafter, it will move north, northeast and northwest towards the Bay of Bengal and the Odisha coast. People have been advised to stay in safe places during thunderstorms. Weather officials have asked the district administrations to suspend fishing and tourism activities till May 13th.
Good news with 2,288 new COVID-19 cases, India's daily COVID-19 tally tips.
India's daily COVID-19 cases on May 10th dipped slightly as the nation logged 2,288 new coronavirus infections according to the Union Health Ministry data. On May 9th, the nation reported 3,207 new COVID-19 cases. The active cases dipped to 19,637, while the death toll climbed to 5,24,103 with 10 fresh fatalities. A decrease of 766 cases has been recorded in the active COVID-19 caseload in a span of 24 hours. Delhi reported 799 fresh coronavirus cases and 3 deaths due to the disease on May 9th, while the positivity rate dropped to 4.94%. Maharashtra state on May 9th reported 121 fresh cases of coronavirus, down from 224 on May 8th, and no new death linked to the infection was registered in the state. Mumbai city on May 9th reported 63 COVID-19 cases, almost 50% less than 7th May's addition of 123. The death toll remained unchanged at 19,563, while the recovery count increased by 56. Tamil Nadu state on May 9th recorded 38 fresh COVID-19 cases, registering a slight decline from 47 on May 8.
The Indian Meteorological Department issues a yellow alert saying that the heat wave will return to Delhi on 11th of May.
After a few days of respite, scorching heat is back to haunt the Indian capital. The Indian Meteorological Department has issued a yellow alert warning of a fresh heat wave spell in Delhi, which may see temperatures soaring to 44 degrees Celsius by May 11th. The heat wave spell may continue till May 15th, as a mitigating weather system is unlikely to affect northwest India over the next 1 week, weather experts have said. Though there won't be a steep rise in temperatures in most parts of Delhi, easterly winds are prevailing in the region under the impact of Cyclone Asani over the Bay of Bengal, and the increase in humidity levels can cause discomfort. Temperatures in parts of Rajasthan, Gujarat and Vidarbha region may jump to 46 to 47 degrees Celsius due to the dry and hot westerly winds. Back-to-back patchy rain, thunderstorms and strong winds had provided some respite from the intense heat last week.
The Life Insurance Corporation of India (LIC) IPO has been subscribed nearly 3 times. The Indian Government Enterprises has raised rupees 21,000 crores, that's approximately $2.7 billion.
The LIC IPO is fully booked under all categories, and the focus shifts to the listing on stock exchanges on May 17th. This IPO has been the country's biggest public offer. It was subscribed 2.95 times on the last day of the offer period on May 9th, helping the government mobilize about rupees 21,000 crores. The qualified institutional buyers category was subscribed 2.83 times. As many as 11.20 crore bids were received for the 3.95 crore shares or marked for the segment. Retail individual investors bid for 13.77 crore shares as against 6.9 crore shares on offer for the segment, translating to an oversubscription of 1.99 times. The policyholders' portion was subscribed a little over.
Ladies and gentlemen, very soon we'll be crossing over to the Queensland Parliament House for the live coverage. Until then, we will continue with the Daily India Report.
6 times, while that for employees was subscribed 4.4 times. LIC had fixed the price band at Rs 902 to 949 per equity share for the issue. The offer includes a reservation for eligible employees and policyholders. The retail investors and eligible employees will get a discount of Rs 45 per equity share, while policyholders will get a discount of Rs 60 per share. The government has diluted a 3.5% stake in the insurance behemoth through the offer for sale.
Bollywood film KGF Chapter 2 crosses $25 million overseas with bumper collections in the Middle East during Eid.
KGF Chapter 2 has collected over $25 million internationally, with a total of $25.65 million outside India through 8th May. In its 4th weekend, Yash Starrer added $0.50 million to its total.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the bells ring. So, very soon we'll be crossing over to Queensland Parliament House for the live coverage of today's proceedings.
The trailer of the upcoming film Prithviraj, directed by Chandra Prakash Dwivedi and produced by Yash Raj Films,
Delhi. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you in the Daily India Report for today. And once again, We'll be back with the Daily India Report tomorrow morning, but right now we're just waiting to cross over to Queensland Parliament for today's proceedings. As we have seen that the bells just rung, so we should be beginning any minute. In the meantime, let's take a look at Prince Charles as he opens UK Parliament.
Her Majesty's Government will continue to seize the opportunities of the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union to support economic growth.
Sitting today on the land of Aboriginal people and pay my respects to elders past and present. I thank them as First Australians for their careful custodianship of the land over countless generations. We are very fortunate in this country to have two of the world's oldest continuing living cultures in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose lands, winds and waters we all now share. Are there any matters of privilege? Honourable members, I have to report that I have received from the Auditor General Report 15/2021-22, Local Government 2021. I table the report for the information of members. I also wish to advise that we will be visited in the gallery this morning by students and teachers from Holy Spirit School, New Farm in the electorate of McConnell. Congratulations, Education Minister. Are there any appointments to be announced? Will the clerk read the list of petitions lodged?
The following honourable member has lodged 3 petitions which are now closed and presented. Mr Crandon from 1,210 petitioners requesting the House to ensure the delivery of a public hospital and health precinct on the northern Gold Coast. Mr Crandon from 382 petitioners requesting the House to upgrade bus services between Ormeau Railway Station and Coomera Railway Stations. Mr Crandon from 224 petitioners requesting the House to upgrade and improve the operation of Exit 38 on the M1. Mr Crandon from 91 petitioners requesting the House to upgrade bus services between Bean Lane Railway Station and Ormeau Railway Station. Mr Crandon from 357 petitioners requesting the House to provide a regular daily bus service for residents of Jacobs Well to connect the transport hub of Ormeau and the nearby Pimpamar shopping precinct. The following lodged e-petition, sponsored by the clerk, is now closed and presented. 664 petitioners requesting the House to call upon their federal colleagues to implement the Jenkins recommendations and to recognise and commit to rectifying the unmet needs of women and children impacted by gendered violence in the Southern Downs region.
Notifications and tablings. I call the clerk.
I inform the House that tabling of certain papers in accordance with the notification and tabling of papers document emailed to members.
Are there any ministerial papers? Are there any ministerial notices of motion? Are there any ministerial statements? I call the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I just want to advise the House that I have quite bad hay fever at the moment. I've taken a rat test and I'm negative. So, before everyone wants to say anything. Mr Speaker, it's my sad duty to report that a woman has passed away in floodwaters in North Queensland overnight. The woman went missing after a car washed off a road at Mount Ossa, north of Mackay, last night. I thank the emergency services personnel and SES volunteers who worked through the night to find this woman. Tragically, I'm advised that they have recovered her body. Mr Speaker, I offer my heartfelt condolences to the family, and I sincerely hope that this is the last tragedy. Mr Speaker, this tragedy serves as a stark reminder to Queenslanders of the dangers of weather events. The SES have responded to more than 110 requests for assistance since 3 p.m. yesterday, and they continue to assist the community as I speak. Emergency services were also called to reports of minor flooding affecting 3 properties after intense falls in Townsville overnight, but were not required to evacuate any residents. Mr Speaker, heavy rainfall has hit many regions across the state in the last 24 hours. Overnight, they've recorded 244 millimetres at Marillion Mill, south of Innisfail, 200 millimetres at Innisfail Wharf, and 180 millimetres at Paluma, North Queensland. The Bureau of Meteorology advises that heavy rainfall may redevelop this morning over eastern parts of the Herbert and Lower Burdekin, as well as the northern central coast and Whitsundays. The risk of heavy rain is expected to ease later today as the heaviest falls continue to move offshore. A number of flood warnings are now current across the state, including major flood warnings for the Bowley River near Townsville, the Horton River and the Cooper Creek. Our flood watch continues for numerous catchments across northern, central and western Queensland. And I'm advised that multiple regions around the state have experienced flash flooding. Mr Speaker, I'm also advised that the man rescued from floodwaters in Mount Isa yesterday has been discharged from hospital, and I wish him and his family all the best. And I thank the thousands of emergency services personnel and volunteers who continue to put their lives on the line to take care of us this week. Mr Speaker, Queenslanders have done a great job so far, but we know how quickly things can turn from bad to worse in heavy rain and storms here in Queensland. Again, Mr Speaker, I urge all Queenslanders to please be prepared. Don't travel unnecessarily on the roads during the weather. Please monitor the weather warnings issued by the Bureau, and always remember, if it's flooded, forget it. Mr Speaker, yesterday I announced historic changes to how this state will deal with domestic and family violence. These were the recommendations of Justice Margaret McMurdo and her inquiry. Key to them is a holistic approach that includes greater education and awareness, particularly of coercive control. It was also recommended that a commission of inquiry be examined to examine the role of police. Mr Speaker, I once again make it plain that our police do a great job in this state. Their dedication has saved lives. As former Commissioner Bob Atkinson said, police last year responded to 120,000 calls for help linked to domestic violence. The service itself estimates it responds to 300 incidents of domestic and family violence a day. But among the 700 submissions to Justice Margaret McMurdo's inquiry were women who said the system had failed them. The Commission of Inquiry is to stop these women from continuing to fall through the cracks. The terms of reference will include whether there are cultural issues within the Queensland Police Service relating to the investigation of domestic and family violence, how they might relate to the over-representation of First Nations people in the criminal justice system, assess the capability, capacity and structure of the QPS to respond to domestic and family violence, and adequacy and conduct of the handling of complaints. The Commission may receive submissions from relevant individuals and entities and hold public and private hearings. It will be conducted by Her Honour Judge Deborah Richards. She is a former Crown Prosecutor, Public Defender and President of the Children's Court of Queensland. I acknowledge the comments made by the Queensland Police Union President Ian Levers, who said the inquiry was an opportunity to appreciate the pressures and workload on police and to improve. Mr Speaker, these are complex issues. Every day another 10 women are admitted to hospital because of domestic and family violence. Each of us has a role to play in confronting it, preventing it and ensuring perpetrators face justice. We have arrived at this historic turning point, not as a government, but as a community. I thank Judge McMurdo and her task force. I thank the members of this government's own Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Council. But most of all, I thank the families of the victims of these hideous crimes. Alison, Hannah's... I thank the families of the victims of these hideous crimes. Alison, Hannah's children and hundreds of others are no longer with us, but their families continue to fight for them with grace, with patience, with dignity and with unbelievable strength. As Hannah's dad, Lloyd Clark, said yesterday, our angels have voices. Justice McMurdo's reports urges us to hear her voice. So we have, Mr Speaker. We have heard it together. Mr Speaker, a strong resources industry is vital to rebuilding Queensland's economy and creating jobs for the people of this state. Queensland's resources industry has gone from strength to strength under our government. In total, we've supported $21 billion worth of investment into resources projects, creating more than 8,000 jobs. Our government always backed Queensland's resources sector to create jobs and diversify our economy into the future. And Mr Speaker, today I have some good news for our industry. Queensland's Independent Coordinator-General has declared a $242 million vanadium proposal in the state's northwest, a coordinated project. The Richmond to Julia Creek vanadium project has the potential to mine up to 4.2 million tonnes of ore per year. The minerals will be processed on-site to produce 790,000 tonnes of vanadium concentrate. Even more importantly, Mr Speaker, this project is expected to create 50 construction jobs and an extra 200 ongoing jobs once it's up and running. Mr Speaker, vanadium is one of the top 5 minerals required to develop renewable energy technologies. As a result, this project could help to drive Queensland's ambition to become a renewable energy powerhouse in the future. This development and other projects like it will be supported by our commitment to build a $10 million critical minerals demonstration plant in Townsville. Of course, in order to proceed, this proposal will have to meet stringent environmental approvals, but I'm advised this project is very promising. Mr Speaker, we understand how important this issue is, how it creates jobs, and we will continue to drive the exploration of these new minerals to make sure that it contributes to our renewable energy future. And finally, Mr Speaker, the Queensland Reconciliation Awards honouring initiatives which advance reconciliation across Queensland will be held in the next few weeks in Cairns during National Reconciliation Week. Today I'm pleased to update the House that 16 outstanding finalists across 5 categories have been shortlisted for this year's awards, now in its 20th year. These include a youth-orientated Indigenous language program, social media projects sharing Indigenous stories, and businesses enhancing job opportunities for First Nations people. And Mr Speaker, I table the 16 finalists. Reconciliation is as much about the journey as it is about the destination, ensuring all voices are heard, acknowledging and accepting the wrongs of the past and creating new systems built on fairness, equity and trust. I congratulate all the finalists and commend everyone who put forward a nomination, and I look forward to attending the awards in Cairns.
I call the Deputy Premier.
Mr Speaker, Queensland's Northwest Minerals Province is one of the world's most promising sources of critical new economy minerals. These are the minerals the world needs to keep advancing new technology renewables and other new economy products. One of these critical minerals is vanadium, used to make products such as specialty vanadium redox flow batteries. This type of battery is just one of the exciting energy storage technologies being developed for use in electric vehicles and industrial-scale renewable power. Queensland's Northwest Minerals Province and our state's role in the new economy supply chain has just taken another step forward. Queensland's Coordinator-General has made a coordinated project declaration for the $242 million Richmond Julia Creek vanadium project. This will be one of the first mines to produce vanadium in Queensland. It could mine up to 4.2 million tonnes of ore each year for processing on-site into 790,000 tonnes of vanadium concentrate. As a coordinated project, the proposal will undergo a rigorous assessment of all environmental, social and economic impacts, and there will be extensive community consultation. Pending approvals, the project is expected to create up to 50 construction jobs. It is estimated there will be 200 operational jobs, with the mine expected to be in production for 20 years. Construction could start in 2023 and the mine could be operational in 2024. The project is proposed by Richmond Vanadium Technology, who plan to transport concentrate to the Port of Townsville for export. There is also potential for future use in local processing and manufacturing as well, and the Queensland Government is also pursuing those opportunities. We have announced plans for a demonstration vanadium processing plant. To be established in Townsville. We are also developing a Queensland battery industry strategy. The Northwest Minerals Province is already one of the world's richest sources of base and precious metals. Proposals such as the Richmond Julia Creek Vanadium project show that Queensland is ready to diversify into the next generation of commercial mineral production.
I call the Treasurer and Minister for Trade and Investment.
Speaker, the Palaszczuk Labor Government understands the needs of Queenslanders in our rapidly growing state. We develop plans for the infrastructure Queenslanders need, and we deliver on those plans. That's why in last year's budget our government announced ongoing funding to develop more social and affordable housing for Queenslanders, including our $1 billion housing investment fund. The investment returns on the $1 billion Housing Investment Fund will create an ongoing source of funding, which will be delivered through partnerships with property developers and community housing providers. Those returns will Those returns will enable and co-build-to-rent development in the Valley, supported by our government and the member for McConnell. Speaker, another program designed to get more Queenslanders into a McConnell. Speaker, another program designed to get more Queenslanders into a home is Home Builder. Members will be aware that this federal government program is administered by the states. As Scott Morrison might say, that's not my job. Unfortunately, Speaker, Scott Morrison did a bad... That's not my job. Unfortunately, Speaker, Scott Morrison did a bad job of designing the program. Because he didn't work closely with the states, Scott Morrison ended up introducing a definition of new home that was contrary to the long-standing and well-understood arrangements that apply. Contrary to the long-standing and well-understood arrangements that apply. Contrary to the long-standing and well-understood arrangements that apply. Restrictive guidance from the federal government meant that the Queensland Revenue Office was required to refuse some applications on the basis that work had commenced prior to the start of the program. This affected around 200 of 20 to the start of the program. This affected around 200 of 29,000 applicants who have been left in the lurch by these federal rules. Speaker, with the Assistant Minister for Treasury, the member for Jordan. Speaker, with the Assistant Minister for Treasury, the member for Jordan, we have worked with industry bodies including the Property Council of Australia and the UDIA to push the federal government to fix their mistake. I'm pleased to announce today that after that relentless advocacy, the Commonwealth has now relaxed its guidance to allow the bulk of these rejected applications.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there because there is some of the transmission issues. It's doubling up on all the things saying. But as we know, that the full segment would be a little bit long. And we have at 10 a.m. The real estate update with Usha Chandra coming up as well. With the Queensland Parliament Live, when it gets into the question time, it does get a little bit lively, but, it's a long process happening through there as well. So we will bring to you the beginning part always as the Premier's addresses in the very beginning. Until our next segment, which is at 10 a.m. with the real estate update with Usha Chandra, it's goodbye from us from this segment.